Morning. Okay, so I've started the video. I think a lot of these videos probably have long stretches of dead time at the beginnings.
And yesterday with Everyone's Troubles.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot. I probably need to go in like a half hour, 45 minutes.
Yeah, a lot of weird hardware issues. Or like,
Considering that all these machines are the same, that they all have the same underlying image, and that the virtual machine is the same, why is there so many variant errors? Yeah. So today is to talk about table expressions, but I can answer some questions about some of the earlier stuff if you need to.
And then it works. So that was a big thing I was missing about this.
So do you guys have any questions that you want me to cover before I get started on table expressions? You said you'd figured out the subquery problem, huh?
Well, you would help me, but I totally missed the very important part of our statement about subqueries and why you use them.
Yeah.
To bypass like the other clause they have in the main query.
Right, they just return a totally independent result. No other questions? Everybody's fine? All right. Most of what I see is fine. I have been I've occasionally checked off a couple of things. And as I've said before, anytime if you ever lose any points, you can get them back, right? You just redo it. And I usually tell you what you missed, so it's usually not too hard to redo. All right, so table expressions. Anybody know what those are?
Tables as reports as tables or queries as tables.
Right. So basically, it's a subquery in the from clause. So you're querying a table that only exists as a result of a query. Does that make sense? Yeah, it's not a physical query. You're basically querying a result set. Does that make sense? And that can be really useful sometimes. So come on in. I'll let you guys get set up. So a table expression is basically, a subquery in the from clause, and you're querying a result set. I'll just write that down while people get set up. So I'm going to use community assist, and I'll execute that. I sometimes type it just like you do and forget to execute it, and then everything goes, bad until I realize that. All I did was a subquery is a table expression is a subquery in the from clause, and it's a query. Basically, what you're doing is you're querying a result set rather than a physical table.
So the query runs, pulls a result, and then you run off of that.
Right.
Or it happens.
Yeah, well, let's do, So I am going to do a simple one where I do a select, and I'll do the person key. I'm going to, actually that's a keyword, so let's put it in. I'm going to use the aliases that aren't there, but they'll be in the subquery. Last, first, what else do I have? And then city. And then I'm going to do from. And what I'm going to get as a table is I'm going to select okay, so we want person key, person last name, and then I'll alias that as last. That's where the last comes from in the outer query. Person first name, and I'll alias that as first. And one of the things, we'll see this in views too, if you alias something in the subquery here, you have to use the alias outside. You don't have a choice of optioning for something else. The alias becomes the column name. What else do we have? City. All right. So from person, which I'm going to do as a P, and that should be from, not a comma. Inner join. Whoa. Person address. Is it person address or just address now? Address. I renamed a lot of things. Actually, I have person address.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I think contacts, I changed from person contacts to just contacts. I didn't change person address. On P dot person key equals P A dot person key. I think, and I did do in this, I did where city equals Bellevue, although you could do this externally. You don't have to have that necessarily in here. And then one of the things with a table expression is you have to name the subquery. You have to give it a name. So you have to alias it as, I'm going to say as Bellevue residence. What is it not like? Is it persons? What is the name of the field? Person key probably needs a alias in front of it. I'm just looking at this. Why? Oh, this one does. And then I don't think the outer one does. Is this the field in there like person, address, city?
Do we actually alias city as something?
Well, we don't. It'll take the field if you don't alias it. I suspect what I did is I did the wrong. It's person, address, city. So let's alias it as city. And then I think I have to do here person, address, city. There, I think we got it. Okay, so what we're doing, we have an outer query that's querying a result set, which is this subquery. This inner query has the inner join in it, right? And it would work also, I don't know if I did this before, if you don't want to put the where in there, and it actually probably makes more sense not to, I'm going to copy this again. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to close it here, and then I'm going to on the outside here say where city, and then we need to rename this as something as and then that parentheses needs to go away. This will have actually exactly the same effect, but it's actually probably a better structure when I think about it, because then you could change whatever city you want. Right? Whereas if it's in the inner query, it's sort of a... Does that make sense? What about it doesn't make sense, or is it all crystal clear? They said this could be really useful, especially when you're trying to get to certain pieces of information, rather than having to join. Well, we are joining things, but you can query that. Query your query is often really useful to do. So I hear nothing, so let's continue. But if you do have questions, stop me.
So, I mean, if you took away the top select and from, and you get the same results, right?
Well, so if I do this first one, as I said, I think the second structure is.
Yeah.
So one of the things that we get here, we're querying the subquery, but we're also getting, so we got the aliases here. One of the things when we talk about with views is, which is also part of this assignment, I think, is when we get to a view, one of the things you can do with a view is you can obscure the structure of the database from the user, right? So they can't see the underlying, we see the views. What they will see is just a name that they can query. And they won't see, I mean, you can rename all the columns, any joins in there. All they'll see is the result set from the view. So you can use it to obscure the structure, which is actually good in terms of security. Basically, if you're a database administrator, you should assume that everyone is either malicious or incompetent. And you protect everything as much as you can. It's sort of a sad mindset, I suppose, but
Probably right.
yeah, it's probably best for your database. So yeah, you could do, I mean, in terms of this, you could do that without the subquery really, but it's a way to show how it works. I think my next one,
If you do the subquery alone and you try to do the where clause, it won't work.
right, the where clause would have to be in the subquery if you're going to do it that way. Yeah. I'm going to do another one a little bit different, and we're going to count something. So I'm going to do, let's look at request. So I'm going to do, we'll do a month. So we're going to have request. And then I have so I did grant type. So let's do grant. I'm just going to leave this the way it is. Grant type name. I'm looking off an example and realizing I've changed the database since then, so all the names are different. And I'm going to do count grant type name. And then we'll do it from, oh, okay, so let's give that as count, I guess. Okay, so from, and then we'll do a subquery. Select month, grant request date, and we will alias that as request month. And then I'm going to just do grant type name. And then actually that should be all I need, right? Okay. And I'm going to do it from, so we get rid of that. Inside of this, from grant request. And then we'll inner join so we'll inner join on grant type. And then we need to say how they relate, so it's on grant type dot grant type key equals grant request dot grant type key. All right, and I'm going to close this and say as I'm just thinking, what did I name as grant counts, grant type counts or something. Probably not a great. What is I not like about this? Oh, I know why. I aliased it. I have to use the alias. I overslept this morning, and I'm not sure I ever woke up, so you guys might need that. All right, and then this thing still isn't quite right because I need to do a group by, and I'm going to group by outside of the subquery. I'm going to group by request month and by grant type name. Because you have to group by everything that's not part of the aggregate, right? And count is an aggregate. So what this should give me is a count of how many of each type of grant were given. I'm not counting the money. I'm not summing the money, although you could do that. I'm just counting the thing. So, oh, this is because there's different months, right? So there's 2 child cares. There's 2 months, basically. There's 8 and 9, 8 and 9, 8 and 9, 8 and 9. So there's 2 of each thing, basically. And this is the count of how many of each of these things were offered in each month. It's weird. Food has a 2, 8. Is that right? Yeah, 2 and 8. Which I must have entered something at an odd time. I mean, the data isn't very, yeah.
Quick question. So when you have the column name, how do you space those in the words? Like, if you say request one, please space it. The column name.
What do you mean? Like if you wanted a...
Make it as 2 words.
If you wanted it to be 2 words, you have to, in all of these, you'd have to put a square brackets around them. So if I want the grant type name, if I wanted to change that, I could just, if I wanted to alias it down here, I could do grant type name, but I'd have to refer to it up here exactly the same way. Now, again, you could do all of this. Now, and this, again, it has to be in here. So, and then I have to do it here. And it will work. It has spaces in the names. If you're, anytime you're using illegal characters and spaces in illegal character, you need to put it in square brackets. Actually, double quotes also work, but I would just stick with the square bracket. Other questions on that? Does that make sense? I mean, again, you could do this with a simple jump. You don't have to use the subquery. And I'm not sure which is more efficient. Which, if we had time, we could explore that maybe a little bit. I have read that a lot of times a subquery is more efficient than to do it by joins. That being said, I mean, there's joins in our subqueries. I'm not sure how it all balances out. And, you know, these may not be the most useful examples, but I do think there are a lot of times when querying queries is really quite useful. Questions on these? I think that's all I'm going to do for this type. I'm going to show you common table expressions, which are the same principle but a different structure. And the book, which I no longer possess because I lent it out and it never came back. Yeah.
I got some red underlines.
Where?
For some reason, not on that example. That's fine, but I'm not some person for some reason I can't put the underlines.
We could take a real quick look. I'll get rid of this for there. So let's look at a common table expression. If you guys are okay with these. What? Well, so a common table expression is very similar to what we just did, but structured a little differently. You derived table are they call them table expressions. Yeah. Common table expression is just a different structure, syntactical structure for doing exactly the same thing. In fact, I'm going to do exactly the same thing, but in a different structure. So I'm going to do, you've never seen this, with, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to name so with, let's just call it residence as, and then I'm going to do a parentheses and a parentheses. And what we're going to do in here is we're just going to do the query. In fact, we could do the same inner query that we did here. I think I'm just going to, so I have the parentheses. I'm just going to copy that. The second example is what I'm copying. And then I can also, at the very end of this, what is it not? I'm just looking at this. So at the end of this, I'm going to do a select, and then I can do like the first part of this. And then we'll say from residence. What is it not liking about that?
scroll it down so we can see more of your code and less of the output.
Yeah, but there's just with residence as parentheses, parentheses. Let's do count. Why not happy there? Yeah, so I would have given error. Right. With new residence, with residence as. It wanted a batch separator, I guess. Okay. So this is the preferred structure. Anybody have a guess why? Either one works. I mean, it works exactly the same
You
as the
don't
other
have
one.
to alias it.
Well, because you're defining the table before you query it, right? In the other, you're querying the table before you define it. So if you go up to the other one up here, we're running our query before we've defined what we're querying. Does that make sense? We're querying last city before we know what that is. Whereas in this, the common table expression, you're defining what the subquery, I mean, what the query is, the subquery, the table expression, before you query it. So just logically, it's a little cleaner to define it first before you query it. Both work, you know, but this is considered a slightly preferred structure. That makes sense? As this work, they have exactly the same results. This is a little logical. I'll do the other one too, but it's essentially the same. So I define, you know, the table as with, and there's some other instances where you can use with. With is actually, as you notice, it's blue. It's a keyword. One of the things you can use with is you can force a index, you know, which usually do, but it's possible if you've created an index and your query isn't using it, you can force it to use it. Generally, the reason why it's not using it is that the optimizer said it was more problems than it was worth. But all right, so I'm going to do this one as with grant count as, and I think I'm going to get the same kind of, what did I do up here that had to have a go? Is it going to do the same thing here? And again, I can do the same inner query as the one where we did the count. So I'm just going to do this. And then I can do a select. And I could select request month, grant type name. Actually, I have to do that in square brackets because I did that. And then I'm going to do count. Kind of wish I hadn't done that. Getting my parentheses and things. All right, so from, and then grant count. And then I need to do the group bys. And that should, oh, I have a comma where I don't need it. That should have exactly the same effect as the other. What am I getting? Oh, I didn't alias my count. So again, these do exactly the same as the table expressions. It's just a slightly more logical structure. It's also a little bit more verbose structure. You know, I mean, you have to do more typing.
That's probably more explanatory as to what it's doing.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's just clear. It's kind of like with inner join. You never have to say inner join. You can just say join. But if you say inner join, it's clearer what you're doing. And you never have to say left outer join. You can say just left join. But again, I use the outer just to be clear. Questions on those? These are, when they're useful, they're really useful. But you may not use them a lot.
When they're useful, when are they really useful?
I think you have really complex, these are not complex, but when you have really complex queries, it's often, one of the things you can basically do here is you can break it up into subqueries that you can query, right? So it allows you to create a structure that's maybe a little bit clearer than if you did a really long, complicated set of queries. Like if you needed to query an outer join, but you needed to combine it with an inner join, I could try to do that here. You might do the outer join inside the subquery as a table that you would then query. You know, I mean, I'm just trying to think of examples off the top of my head. The book had several examples, and if you go online, there's a lot of people that swear by these things, use them a lot. My examples are fairly simplistic, so there's not a whole lot of difference between them and a normal join, really. But, does that make sense? I might, when we get to the cross-applied, you can have an example in here. I might go to the internet just to look for an explanation, because as many times as I've read an explanation, I'm like you, I've never come up with a good definition of it.
So the common table expression, that persists in some way more than any other?
It's not. You could, one of the things I'm going to do is we'll make views, and you could put one in a view, right? And then they would persist, but these don't persist as they are. I'm just looking to what I have next. Oh, this one I'm not sure makes a difference. I'm going to do it kind of, I think I'll do it, basically I'm going to just copy this one again. But I'm going to make a slight difference to it. And again, I did it mostly because the book did it, as I recall. So rather than Bellevue down there, I am going to, I'm just going to declare a variable. So I'm going to declare at city, and let's do in varchar, probably 255. And then you can set at city equals whatever city you want. You guys have a choice.
Seattle.
Seattle is the majority city in the database, so we'll probably get quite a few. And so down, instead of doing Bellevue, you just do at city, And the only advantage is, let's kind of lower this a little if I can. There we go. Get a little more of that. This is just using a variable. Have we used a variable before? It seems like I did once before. When we do stored and triggers, we'll be using quite a few variables. A variable in SQL always starts with an @ sign. And generally, it's a fairly verbose language, and you have to declare it. Declare @city in varchar. You have to give it a type. Okay? And then you can either set or select to give it a value. Select is usually used when you're getting a value from a table to assign to the variable. You get a value from a query to assign to it. I'll show you that one. So, I run this, you have to run the whole thing. And it'll give you the same. So we got Seattle there. There's 115 rows for Seattle. If I, yeah, there's a couple, because we could put distinct in here if we wanted. It's because man actually has 2 addresses. They're both in Seattle, but they're. So if we wanted to, we could change this to distinct, and then we'd only get 1. Whoa. That's because I didn't run the variable. There we go. So now we've only got 1 Lulu man in the city. And if I were to change this to, so we got Kent, Bellevue. I don't think there's any, there might be a Tacoma. Let's see.
Renton?
There probably is Renton. No Tacoma, so let's do Renton. No, I have in the Redmond. There we go. We have 1 person in Redmond. Sure.
The distinct, is that going to act upon in the select statement?
So there won't be any distinct in here. It's selecting a distinct result from the query.
Right, but I mean, I guess this is like the question I should have asked.
Okay.
What columns of information is it acting on?
It can act on a column.
No, just
It acts on the row.
on all.
Right. So if there's any variation in the row, it will return it.
Okay, so it's completely identical rows.
Right. It's the whole row has to be the same.
And it is the same as group on the entire group I on the entire row, right?
Right. Well,
We just group the entire row, it'd be the same thing.
I possibly.
Could you have distinct on the inner select?
I could have. And then it would, then I'll set with duplicates. Right, so whichever way. The reason you would get duplicates is that some people have multiple addresses. And we're not calling the address itself, so we're not getting the distinct part, right? If we added the address in there, then we would get, even if we put distinct, we'd still get 2 for Thomas Fine because the address would be different. I'm not sure about group by, we could try that. Usually you group by a column, but if you group by all the columns in the row, it probably have the same effect as a distinct. Yeah, distinct is only for rows and then second word, right? So, and I think there is a lot of confusion. People going person key or distinct.
And that's why I was asking.
Yeah.
I was noticed there, I was like, is it because you're actually searching for the first key, you know, if you're doing by person key, that would be what I was thinking or asking.
Yeah, it would actually, I mean, if it could do that, it would have the same effect at this point, but.
Okay.
Other of what? Okay, so let me look at the assignment. Did I in the assignment ask for a cross string or a cross apply?
The last question.
That's kind of the,
I'm tempted to drop it since I can't explain it well.
Extra credit.
Yeah, I could do. If you want to do it as extra credit. Typically, though, people that do extra credit don't need extra credit. Notice that? Notice that. Given I've done extra credit, yeah. I've done extra credit in other classes where I added, and the people that are consistently do the extra credit don't need it. They've already got all their points. Yeah.
we do have to talk about views though.
Yeah, I'm going to talk about views. I may talk about cross-apply too, but I might have to think about it a little bit more.
And there was an issue with the question too.
Yeah, I think I was going to look at it after I do views. We'll go back to it and we'll see what we can do with this. So let's do views. So anybody, I've talked about views before, but the essence of a view is that they're a stored query. And there are some different things about views. So I'm going to just make a real simple view. I'm just wondering what view I did first. So let's do one for employees. Let's say you were working in HR and you wanted to see all the employee information. So I am going to create view, and then I need to give the name, the view a name. And I typically do like VW underscore, and then let's just call it employees, I guess. So that's the name of it. You always have an as. We'll see as quite a bit. Notice when we did the common table expressions, there was an as. Typically what the as references, like if we have an alias, this name is essentially an alias for everything that follows. Does that make sense? It's sort of a, when we do store procedures, they always start with as. Functions have an as, you know, the definition starts with the as, basically. So it's sort of, and unlike with a alias though, these as's are required. So what do we want to know about employees? We've got the employee table has hire date, annual salary, person key. We might also want to know like their position, right, and their name. So let's do person, last name, and we'll just do that as last name. Oh, I do need a select, and I probably want to do this too. I'm going to structure this a little. You don't have to. Person first name. And I'll just do this as first name. That should, I'm going to capitalize that. So in employee, we want their employee hire date. And I'll just do that as hire date. And I will do employee annual salary. And I'll just do salary. No comma there. It must be painful to watch me type it in and do this. And let's do position name. And I'll just do it in square brackets as position. should be all right, but I think, don't I have a table called position? All right, so we need to do some inner joins, right? So from person, P, inner join employee E on P dot person key equals E dot person key. And then we need to inner join employee position. Is that the name of the field, or is it position? I think it's employee position. Which we'll do is EP on E dot employee key equals EP dot employee key. And then we need to inner join on position. And let's make that that can't be P, so I guess it's also has to be spelled right. PO, I guess. PO dot position key equals EP dot position key. And one of the things that's underlined up there is because it likes a Go. These are supposed to be built in their own batch. And the Go is a separate batch separator. And it's a partial compensation for lack of semicolons. So I would put a semicolon here, right? If I were to do the semicolon, it would go right here. So what this is a query, right? It's a complicated query in that it has, what, 4 tables joined. We've aliased everything. So when I create this view, when I run it, I go from create view all the way to the end. I execute. All right, so it doesn't execute the query. It says it completed successfully. And the reason for that is it has created an object. So if I'm just going to close up these tables a bit. If you go down to views, I now have DBO, VW employees. DBO being database owner, right? View employees. Yeah, well, that's fine. Actually, put a Go in front of it. Yeah, it'll run without it. It'll actually run. Even though the first line is, if you don't have a Go above it, the first line will have red squigglies. But if you just run the view, it'll work fine. So if we're going to use the view, all right, and a lot of times when you're an employee, you don't have access to the tables. You only have access to views and stored procedures. So if we were in HR, we would want to, let's say we do select, first we'll just do select star from VW employees. So here's the results set. Right, so it has all the employees. It has, now Mary Lewis has 2 positions, so her name appears twice. One of the things you'd have to be careful of is you wouldn't want to use this view to calculate total salaries. Because Mary is going to come across as being really, you paid much more than, instead of 65,000, she will be paid, is that 150,000? So you'd have to be careful of this. And that's true of joins in general. Just to let you know, you need to be careful of those kinds of communications.
Is creating a view more efficient than if you were running a query that had all those joins as is?
So I think it's still running all those joins.
It is.
Yeah, so there's no data. One of the things to know about a view is it doesn't store the data.
So
Right? It's just a filter. It's just a stored filter. It's a stored query. So I think it's still actually performing the join in real time when you run the view. So I don't know that it's more. When we get to stored procedures, though, they actually are more efficient because they're run as a single process, a single thread. They're just executed differently. Not that it matters much for how we see things, but it does for efficiency. The other thing is, notice these fields. If I want to say, I just want to see, last name, first name, and position. I can't, so I can do last name, first name, position, and that'll work just fine, right? But if I wanted to say person last name, it doesn't exist in that view, right? So the thing is, if you only have access to the views, you would not know necessarily that there were 3 tables under it, and you wouldn't know what the actual field names are. You only know the aliases. And again, that's good from the database administrative perspective. It's good to abstract and obscure the underlying database structure. It means that they can't attack it as easily. They don't know what the actual structure is. They only know the views that they have. I do know from the school here, I was helping some secretaries with this. They have some SQL servers, but what they give them to do their analysis with is they give them like 30 or 40 views, and all their reporting is based on those views.
Can you update or insert into views?
So views are live data, right? But if you want to change the view, what you have to do is you have to alter, instead of doing create up here, you change this to alter view.
So somebody could mess up the view, but they couldn't mess up the underlying data.
Yeah, these don't change underlying data.
You can update a view though, can't you? You can do updates on view data.
It
Certain
depends.
types of view data.
It depends, yes. All right, so one is they'd have to have permission to do this, right? Because you could deny permission to alter. But that's how you would change it, is alter it. Why does it not like alter? I think it'll still run. Oh, it needs another go. It needs another go. It wants to be isolated in its own. No, this environment, for whatever Microsoft says they're going to do, it ignores. Semicolons.
Well, I mean, I was noticing that I think there are statements below get some sense errors. The statement above, the statement below. It's just a.
See, now this is all underlined, but it worked. When we start creating objects, one of the things that happens is that the IntelliSense is not up to date. There are ways to refresh it. I forget where.
Oh, that would be closed and we open that.
Well, I think there's another way to refresh. Display, parse, query options, results to file, results to text, include client statistics. I swear there's a refresh somewhere. Query. I do not know. I know that people have shown me before, and I always forget where it is. But the simple fact is that it's not up to date. It's not. This is out of sync with the objects. And we'll see that a lot when you get red underlines, and it's still perfectly fine. Notice it executed fine, even though it has all those columns done. But yeah, you can alter it. The other thing that you had talked about, this one you could not update insert through. So there are some rules that every database violates to some extent in terms of updating, inserting through a view. Theoretically, you should be able to insert, or let's comment. insert our update through a view if no column is aliased. So if you alias a column, it won't do it because it doesn't necessarily know what's what. Also, theoretically, no joins. You certainly can't do it if there's any subqueries.
If it was alias and you gave it the actual, explicitly told it the column name, still gonna do it?
No, because again, you don't have access. So if you're trying to update, so what SQL Server does and others do, so there's a couple of other terms in which basically you should only be able to update through a view if it's really simple, if it's really just transparently maps to a table. In fact, it will try. The alias view tends to hold. It will try through a join as long as there's no repeated fields. For instance, if person key was in both two parts of if you have a field in your select that's in a couple of other tables, it'll fail. Like if the person key that's used to join, if it's in the select table, it probably won't work. But it will try. If it can clearly tell every field that's to be inserted or which is the correct field to update, it will try to do it. So sometimes it'll do it, sometimes it won't. But views are a little tricky for that. I would suggest if you're creating a front end for employees that you create stored procedures to do the updates and inserts, because you have more control over it. Views are a little bit iffy whether they'll work for that or not. Does that make sense? So some will work. Even if they violate a couple of these rules, sometimes they'll work. But the general rule is that if there are aliases, it generally won't work. If there are joins, it probably won't work. It certainly won't work if there's any subqueries
So
in the view.
you almost want to make them complicated so that your end users don't have any opportunity to modify.
Right. Although again, you can give them, you can. Yeah, one of the last things that we'll do is we'll spend some time doing permissions and roles and things. And if you were to design these stored procedures, you can give them permissions to run those views, and you can give them permissions to execute the stored procedures and give them no permissions on the tables.
So even if a view was simple enough.
Yeah, they wouldn't be able to update if they don't have the permissions. Yeah. And generally, the rule for permissions when we get there is to give everybody the permissions they need to do their job and no more. That's a thing, though. It can be difficult figuring out what exactly permissions do they need to do their job. And to restrict too much, they're going to come complaining. I can't do my job, this and this and this. All right, so let's close the quote. So are views sort of clear? I was going to do one other thing about views. Oh, a couple of things about a view also. You are not allowed inside of a view order by. All right, so it says it's okay there, but if I do this alter view with that order by, it's going to throw an error. The order by clause is invalid in a view. It's also invalid in inline functions, derived tables, subqueries, and common table expressions. You can't order by inside of those. You can order by the results set from the. So if I wanted to order by name. That's perfect. Fine. But you can't do it within the internal structure of a view, or a table expression, or a function. I am not entirely sure why. Does anybody have a?
Is it because the data in a relational database is not supposed to be ordered?
It's not supposed to be ordered, but I'm not sure why the prohibition of ordering it in a view. I mean, it does. We'd have to recalculate it, everything. And again, order the result set from the view. But you just can't do it in a view. I think there's got to be a structural reason in the way that it formulates it. Yeah, that's what I'm thinking, underneath the way it's interpreted. Because they're very strict about no order by in all of these structures. So it has to be something in the way that it's processed. For performance, it's got to be that it's not doable in the way they structure the.
It was just easier to do because according to this, it's processing an order by command last in any given query. So maybe that caused a problem. They decided to leave it off.
It might be.
At the end anyway, after you get the data. I can see the rationale.
Yeah. It would be interesting. Should look. I actually had a friend that was working on writing. I mean, not actually writing the core code of SQL Server. And I'm curious how these queries are processed because I'm pretty sure it's done in C++. So, I mean, I would suspect that it must give some sort of problem. It probably creates like a recursive function or something in there when they do it. I don't know. Okay, so another thing about a query, and then we'll do a table valued function. I'm just looking at this. So if I do, I'm going to alter this view. Let's do this as creative to copy. I'll alter it, but I'm going to copy. So I'm going to add one clause here, which is basically with schema binding. All right, does anybody have any idea what that is for? It's okay if you don't, I'm just asking. Yeah.
Well, yes, certain format.
Well, so
Rigid format.
it's more, so view is underlined, right?
So you can't change.
What schema binding does is it makes it so you can't change the view you can't change the tables underneath. So it's bound to those schema. You cannot change the schema of those tables unless you drop this view. Get rid of the view.
You can't break the view.
Right, because it's, yeah, if you like go and you underline table, view may no longer work. And so you, like you said, the view. The schema binding, but it's a little bit tricky too, because then you're being pretty strict. Then you're saying, no, you cannot change the underlying table unless you drop this view. In a way, it makes good sense because it keeps you from having broken views. I'm going to execute that. Person is invalid for schema. No, why? It's not so much the DBO, but I have to, yes, I think I do. You're right. I have to do DBO. And I have to do DBO employee. And I have to do DBO employee position. You guys remember what DBO stands for? Database owner. I will show you, we can create our own schema. Database owner is a default schema, and we can create our own schema. We could create an HR schema or something, and this would belong to it, right? So, but the tables belong currently to DBO, the database owner. So having done that, I should be able to do this. No, I'm altering it. Yeah. If I can get to the right place. So it's successful now. So I should not be able to change the person. Looking to see what I'm not sure. So what did I do here to test this? I'm going to try to change the employee table. I'm also going to do begin trend. Do you guys know what I'm doing there? I'm going to exit that. What?
It's not like go backs or roll backs.
So I'm it will allow me to roll back. So it will allow me an undo in case I'm wrong. Yes. So typically and this is something we'll talk about more when we do updates and stuff. Typically when you run a query, it is a transaction, but it's an automatic transaction. It happens as soon as it's done. It begins and ends in milliseconds. This, you're manually beginning a transaction. This was a database, and it started talking like this and hanging there. People would start to get a little PO'd probably because I'm putting a block. I'm putting a lock on the table once I do this too. So when you manually create transactions, you can slow things down a bit.
So what have you locked?
Nothing yet. It really would actually be when I do the next thing. So I'm going to do alter table employee, and I'm going to drop one of the columns. Drop column hire date. Is it employee hire date? Yeah. All right. So it should not allow me to do that with the schema protection in there. I did the begin trend just in case it does allow me to do it. So when I execute it, it should give an error, and it does. The object VW employees is dependent on column employee hire date. Alter table drop column failed because one or more objects access this column. Right, so by binding the schema, it won't let me drop, but it might let me drop a column that's not used in the. Yeah.
Sounds like it's only carrying about one.
So let's do. I'm going to roll back, even though we're not doing anything. Oh, so it doesn't. The transaction happened and it didn't. I'm going to begin a trend. I'm still afraid of this. If I do, one of the things we have in there is, right, we used all of those, right, though? There isn't any column there that we can, but I'm really afraid to do this a little bit. Let me think of,
Healthy fear.
yeah, I'm just trying to think of something that we used. So like,
But if you altered the table and added a column to it and then did it again, and nonprofit or something.
Well, one of the things that, so alter table person and then drop column person email. So we didn't use that. Nope, it won't allow it, even though it's not. I was worried that it would, because if it did, my rollback hopefully would work. But if it didn't, I could go get the script again and run it again.
Oh, because you've got a unique constraint declared upon email.
Oh, is that the reason why it failed? No, it also failed because one or more objects. So it has a unique constraint on it, and it also, I'd have to drop the unique constraint to drop the email. So that I don't know. Is it just because of that, or is it because of the schema binding? But I actually suspect that the schema binding only affects the columns that are used in the creation of in the view. Anyway, I think, I mean, we saw that the binding works at least for those columns, right? You can't change those columns because they're in there. And as I said, I'm a little nervous about some of the others. The rollback trans should work, but I'm not sure if it works on table structures. Yeah. All right. So we did the schema. The other thing I was going to show you for schema, we got schema binding there. If you want to make a new schema, let's, I may regret this later, but create schema donor. All right. And the reason why it's unhappy is, okay, this is all you have to do to create a schema, right? So I'm going to create a schema called donor. All right, so if I wanted to make a view that belongs to donor, I could create view VW, let's say donor info as, oh, and to make it belong to donor, I just do donor dot. So I'm going to select person, last name. I'm not going to be too fancy about this. Person, first name. And then I'm just going to do maybe person email. And person, and then I'm going to do donation date, donation amount. Okay, from person P, and an inner join donation D on P dot person key equals D dot person key. So that's my whole thing. So I'm going to create that. It creates it successfully. And what I want to do is show you under views. So let me refresh. And notice it says, instead of DBO, it says donor dot, right? So it's donor owns this view. One of the things you can do about this, we'll wait until we do the security, but if you make a person belong to make them a member of the donor view, you can make it so they only see the objects that belong to donor, right? So you can limit them to see only a certain subset of objects. And so if they're a member of the donor schema, they can only see donor objects. Does that make sense? So you can use that as a way of grouping permissions and things. I actually usually don't. I do make groups of objects with schema, and then I use a role when we'd get into there. And in the role, I assign permissions on the schema. That way I don't have to assign permissions on every individual object, right? So you can do a select on the entire schema. So you have all the objects in that schema they can select on. It just makes it easier than going through and having to give permissions on each individual view or each individual thing. That's a little ahead of the thing, but I wanted to show you how to do other things in DBO. It's very easy here, and the other thing I want to say is that, as far as I know, no other database does this, although it is ANSI. It is an ANSI standard. It's just that nobody else has implemented it that way. Typically, like in Oracle, if you log in as George, anything you create while you are George is in the George schema. Does that make sense?
I know IBM's databases work that way.
Yeah, typically the way that databases handle schema is that it's coupled to the login. So when you log in as a user, anything that user creates belongs to that user's schema. Microsoft has decoupled the schema from the login. And ANSI, that's within the ANSI standards, but it's, as far as I know, they're the only ones that did it. The other thing I'll say real briefly is that schema is a hugely overused word in database. So schema on one level is a series of related objects, right? It's an ownership of objects. Schema on another level is the structure of a table or the structure of the database. And then we'll talk about XML schema, which are types, definitions of types. So schema is a very overused word. Okay, so that's a database with that. I have one more thing to cover, and then we might look at the cross-apply, if I can remember how to do it. It's interesting, my examples from these are my examples from last time I taught this. Doesn't have a cross-apply example in it.
Have your videos from there?
I'm not sure I made a video last time.
Okay.
I might have. We could. It could be there. Yeah. Oh no, there is a cross-apply down here. I'll look at it in a minute, and we'll see if it works. But first, we'll do one other thing, which is a table-valued function. So all of these things are considered like table expressions. So we did the table expression where we had a subquery as the table definition, and we did the common table expressions, which are kind of exactly the same thing in a different structure. A view is basically a table definition, but it's really a stored query, right? But you can treat it as a table. You can select from it, you can order from its results, you really treat it as a table once you've got it. A view is just like a table when you're using it. And so this is another thing. This is where you write a function that returns a table. Later we'll write other functions that return just like single values. The one I'm not going to do is an aggregate function, because I do think I was looking into it. To write an aggregate function, you have to write it in C#. In MySQL, if you write your own functions, you have to write them in C++. It doesn't have an SQL front end for writing functions. You can write stored procedures, you can write triggers, but it doesn't have one for functions. So basically, if you write it in C++, or here if you write it in C#, then what you're doing is you're extending SQL Server, right? You're adding features to it, which I could show you how to do, but it really isn't part of this class. All right, so table function. Let's see. What I have is a table function for employee. And I may have to change this because I've changed the database since I did this. So I'm going to create a function. And again, it's going to want to go. And I'm going to give it a name. And I typically give my functions like an fx extension and an underscore. The naming conventions, I try to be consistent, but you can find different naming conventions. So I'm going to, what do I want to name this? I think I'm going to see which employees review which grants. So, or we want to see which grants were reviewed by a particular employee. So I'm going to do employee grants. I'm going to give it a parameter. So it's going to be, we're going to take a parameter of the employee key, and that's an int. And this is going to returns a table. We have to say what it's going to return, and it returns a table. That's what makes it a table valued function, right? Later we'll do things where it just returns an int, or it returns a decimal, or something like that. As, and I'm going to return, and what we're going to do is we're basically going to do like we did with our table, the expressions, table expressions. We're going to create a query here that's a table, essentially. And it's going to use the variable as a criteria. Yeah.
Are the parentheses at employee key, is that connected or is that part of?
Yeah, this is a parameter. It has to be passed in.
So you could put it right next to the S and grants.
Oh yeah, you could. Line breaks are
visible.
They don't matter. I make line breaks for readability. But you could write all this on one line if you really want. I try to break off. I mean, I have sort of a pattern way I break it. There are other ways you could break it. Also, I've never mentioned it, but there is, I think a couple of you might be using it. There is some software you can add to this. See if I can remember the name, that will format your SQL. Much nicer than I format it in terms of like indenting and things like that. Yeah, it's like a beautify. So like I use, for my blog, I use Code Beautifier. Which it basically goes through your code and color codes it and indents everything. It makes it really pretty, which is nice, actually. I mean, it works pretty well. There are things like that you can add, the add-ins for this studio management here if you want to get a nicer looking SQL. That being said, as long as it's readable. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select I think it's a grant request key. The person key for the thing, this is going to have an inner join in it. Person key. I guess I'll do grant request explanation. Is that how I spelled it? Yeah. Probably want the grant request date. I'm trying to think of where I would want these. I might put that here, grant request date. I might also put grant review date here, so you can see when it was reviewed. And not renaming these, you could. Person key, grant request explanation. Probably the amount that they request Whoa. I could go there. Guess I can go there, all right. Amount, grant approval amount. I think that's what it's called. I'd have to look at the grant review, grant allocation amount. Okay, so I'm going to do an inner join here from grant request GR, inner join grant review. Can't do that as GR. What do I do that one as? GV. On gr.grant request key equals gv.grant request key. So where, oh, and this needs to be where employee key, which is only in the grant review, equals at employee key. Now, what is it not like about grant request key? Oh, there's a T missing. All right, so that's my function. Does it make sense? It's kind of like what we've done before, except this will be a function where we will enter, we'll call this query, and we will enter an employee key.
So the as return part, is that the return, are there other options that could be there?
If in a table valued query, so we'll do other kinds of functions. In a table valued function, the return is just what the table is going to be, what table is going to be returned.
So it's always going to be return table as return.
Right. Yeah, and notice this has an S. This is returns table. Later we'll say returns int, returns decimal. You know, if it's a scalar function, a function that only returns a single value. This one returns a table. So the other one you might have between as and return, you might have a whole bunch of calculations or something, right? But in this, because it's returning a table, what you have to do is define the table it's going to return. I'm not sure. It is possible that you could do some variable things up here. You might be able to do some calculations up here before you get down to the return table. Does that make sense? I mean, it's possible you could do some selects and some queries and some aggregation and then include them in the table that you're returning. If you want, we could try playing with that. So you may not have to go directly to return, is what I'm saying. You might be able to do some calculations or something up above here, and then just include them as variables down here. I could try that. Let's see how this one works. So I execute. What? All right, let's call it something else. There we go. I'm curious. I'm going down to programmability. And I'm going into functions and table valued functions. And it looks like the one I did from last quarter is in there. But I thought I had a script that was, I didn't think I had done this in this, what I'd scripted. Notice we have both functions there. If I open up, let's do our function. You'll notice it has a thing for parameters, and it says that it takes an employee key. So let's run this function. Table valued functions are a little bit weird in that you just, I'm just going to do select. Oh, and you have to always use the schema. So I'm going to use DBO, employee grant count, and then I'm going to put in, I could either just manually put in something here, or I could select an employee key. I'm trying to think. I'm just going to put in one. Is that right? I think that's actually okay. DBO. Oh, I know what it is. So 1 never did anything there. Let's try 3. 3 isn't doing anything. Do I not have 5 works? Yay, 5. I probably just used 5. I said 5 is the person that reviews everything. There's only like 5 employees, aren't there? What?
I had 17 rows.
Yeah, I have 17 rows too. So there must be other employees.
So there's a note in there where it shows the parameters required and the employee key in no default. Is there a way to set a default?
Yes, there is a way to set a default. When you declare this, you could at that moment declare a default. And it will accept another value, but that's the, if nothing is entered, that's what you get. I was just going to see what other employees. And actually, I want distinct. I just want to see what employees did grant reviews. 2, 5, and 6. And I skipped 2, right? Yeah, okay. So this is a function that returns a table as a result. That's why it's called a table value function. Now, as I said, you could, like, if you wanted to do some aggregates and stuff, you might be able to do them in there. As I said, I could play with that. I'm going to make a slight change here just to see if I can do this. All right, total. This may not make a lot of sense. And then it isn't seeming very happy with it. It may not allow it. Oh, I wonder if we do as begin. Nah. I don't think it's going to let me do anything except this. But I will look and see for sure. And maybe I'm missing some piece of syntax. Okay, let's try the cross apply, I guess. Does that make sense as a return table thing? It kind of fits in with the, as I said, the table is a subset here. This This is very similar to that common table expression where we had the variable. It's just that it's now stored inside of the function. And I think I did select star, but I think you could select, like if you wanted, you could just select grant request amount, grant allocation amount.
You can just treat it like.
Yeah, just like a table. Yeah. So the function is basically performing the role of the subquery.
So you could, just inside of the return as well, so you would have these columns.
Yes, you could alias the columns inside there. And probably be a good idea, actually.
I'm just trying to understand what the functionality is of that. What is it preserved that, because returning a table will have all the table functionality.
I'm just going to do grant request amount. So I think this will work. Again, it's just using that as a sub query. And you could do, so you could do, I mean, basically this is, again, it's just a function that gives you a parameterized subquery. All right. Let's see if I can do the cross apply. I'm looking at this to make sure. So this looks a little bit like a coordinated subquery or correlated subquery. What I have here. Let's see what I get. So I do select distinct grant type key. Grant request amount. From DBO, and I think I had to use this here. Grant request as A, and A just means first. I mean, you could, I could do it as like GRA or just whatever you want to do it. Let's do it as G because A looks a little confusing. I'm going to do cross apply. And then I'm going to do a subquery where I do select grant type key. Grant allocation, or grant request amount rather. Grant key. I think it's grant request key now. Okay, from grant request. And I'm going to call this one as R. Where A not A, because I did G. G dot grant request type, or grant type key rather. Equals R dot grant type key. Order by, I guess you can do order by here. Grant request descending and grant type key. What is it not like about? Oh yeah, I have to say where this is from. So this is from G. And this has to be specified too. Order by grant request amount. I'm trying to figure this out because all my fields are different. Offset 0 rows, fetch first 3 only, as C, and I think actually this should be C dot. And why does it not like that? Grant request R. Grant request G, grant request R. G grant type key. R grant type key. Why is it not like that?
What's the message? What's the hover message?
It just says it cannot find R grant type key. But this is R, where G grant type grant request type equals R grant type key. They both have grant type key, so why does it not? The as isn't necessary, but that's.
Put in DPO in front of grant request.
Oh, you know what? You're right. Well, that still doesn't do it for me. What?
It doesn't seem to be upset on mine, but I use GR1 and GR2.
Well, we can do that. GR1, GR2, GR1, GR2. Still doesn't like it though. Grant type key. Grant type key. Grant type key. Do I need to alias it here? I don't have my example. This one shouldn't work. GR1. Oh, you know what? I'm leaving. I have a word missing here, which might be the whole thing. All right. So, have I any idea what I just did?
So offset 0 rows versus 3 rows only. You've done the same
It
thing.
should have done. You would think top 3 would have worked. I was following an example that they had where they used the offset, but I'm not sure why. And it did sort of work. We're getting the top 3 of each grant type, right? So it did sort of work, but it's really complicated. And trying to explain it is hard. You had some. You said you were reading some explanations.
Yeah, I was reading some forums, and the cross-apply experts are very keen on them. And one of the things they say is that any inner join can be done as a cross-apply, but there are lots of cross-applies that cannot be replicated as
Inner join, yeah. To some extent. Now, when I look at this cross-apply, it's really the functioning here is sort of like the correlated subquery, in that we're basically making sure we're comparing the type keys only to each other, right? So we're taking the top 3 for each grant type key. Let's look real quickly. This probably won't help, but I'm going to do, and it's particularly since I'm using Bing, because I haven't installed Chrome yet.
It doesn't return any Oracle SQL results.
Cross-apply. So it says it returns only rows from the outer table that produce a result set from the table valued function. Outer apply returns both rows that apply to the result set. And again, that doesn't make good sense here. TechNet Microsoft. The apply operator allows you to invoke a table valued function for each row returned by an outer table expression of a query. The table valued function acts as the right input, and the outer table expression acts as the left input. And then they give really complicated examples. I remember this.
I didn't find that page very helpful.
No.
My understanding.
So this might be something for you to do for homework, and then somebody can go out, talk about cross applies, and explain it to me.
Extra credit.
Extra credit, yeah. So as vaguely as I can understand it, this is behaving, what's in parentheses here, is behaving kind of like our table function. Right, we created the table function before. This is kind of behaving as a table function, and it's doing kind of what an outer join would do, or a join would do for the outer, with this query joined or matched to this table function query to get the related results. As I said, I never have explained it well because I don't understand it well. I need to find a really clear explanation of this. Because as I said, even the book, I think, says that it can be really useful. So, did anybody ever read it in the book?
So is this only Microsoft SQL?
I don't think so. Let's see.
I noticed one of those Tom Sawyer was the underappreciated features of Microsoft SQL.
Right. Is there a cross apply in Oracle? Comes up. What is the equivalent of SQL server apply in Oracle? That's not the same. Cross apply in Oracle. Looks like they don't have an exact equivalent. There is no equivalent of cross apply in Oracle.
What exactly does cross apply do?
Yeah. No, it's not a cross join. So I would gather that Oracle doesn't do it. Inner join versus cross apply, explain. So that's what an inner join is.
Wouldn't explain the cross applies to the cross join.
Yeah, I know, it talks about that.
Even when applying a table expression to create, so on the left, right thing, right table, just a table on the left, is the table expression.
And then it's doing a cross join between them, but with criteria.
Right, and then it outputs that as a B5.
Right. So that still doesn't make good sense to me, though. Does it to you?
I don't know, from my very basic understanding, it sounds like you just kind of mix together a lot of things that we've covered thus far. Like, and I don't know, like a lot of things that I'm noticing the various like, terms that we use in SQL is just like formatting, right?
Right. Well, there's a lot of different ways to format queries, and they developed over time. So if it's a cross join,
Yeah, it's very similar to a cross join in the sense that it's putting all that information together. But I'm certain that there are some more specific things.
well, so part of the cross join is that it's limited. It's not a full cross join because it is limiting it to the top three. Now, if we didn't have that top three limit, it's quite possible to be gigantic.
Yeah, the examples they have here are simple, more simplistic than we just did. Well, they're doing is select
I think if you don't select, I want, because it probably joins every possible combination if it's a cross join. But I can't understand how that would be more efficient. And you were reading that it's more efficient than, because cross joins are not efficient.
I'm not aware of necessarily it being more efficient. What they said was that there are things that joins that can be expressed
Only as
only as cross applies that you can't do through units.
And I could see that as a possibility. Actually, even this one,
And it sounded more like the correlated queries, because it's like it's applying.
well, this would actually be hard to do in another way to get. Well, it's the top three of each grant. I guess you could maybe do it by grouping by, or even ordering by. Well, so order wouldn't work. Order by, you'd have all of the ones, and then you'd have all, so you wouldn't get the top three of each one. If you did the top three, you would only get the top three ones. You wouldn't get the top three of the others. There's something about this structure that gives you the top three of each of those, and I'm not sure how you would do that in another type of query.
That's the sort of example that I see almost always for the cross apply.
It's just that I wish I could give you a crystal clear explanation and you go away, and maybe I will before the end of the quarter. I will research it.
If you weren't using the cross apply, how could you achieve those results?
Yeah, I don't know of any other way to achieve those results, but I'm not sure I can explain how it's achieving those results. These results would be really hard to achieve any other way, right? You'd have to do a whole bunch of queries. You'd have to like sort just by grant type 1 and take the top 3, and then just by grant type 2 and take the top 3, and that would be a pain. Or, yeah, I just don't know how else you would do that, actually. Yeah.
I found that some of the stack overflows and query inside of a cross apply can reference the outer symbol, whereas an inner join.
That may be, because it does look, with these aliases, it looks like the correlated subquery, which is that. But you'd think that if the inner query can access the outer one, then you're getting into the recursive type of function again.
The best explanations that I found were in Stack Overflow.
Yeah, Stack Overflow is pretty good, although a lot of times I will look something up. I didn't write the question, but I'll go in and there's a lot of, this is a stupid question. Yeah, it doesn't belong here. Go join that group of amateurs.
Welcome to the world of privilege.
And then there's also, sometimes it's frustrating because you'll read like 30 explanations, none of which are quite on point, and none of which come to a solution that works. But on the other hand, you can get some really good stuff fairly quickly there too sometimes. But I do use Stack Overflow, but partially because that's where Google goes first, generally. Yes. This is one of the more obscure kinds of structures, but as I said, and I think one reason I have trouble explaining it is that until I looked at it in this book, I never used it. And it may be that the cross-apply keywords are only Microsoft. I'm not sure. They don't seem to be in Oracle. I don't know if they're in MySQL or any of those. Again, I think we might be a tiny bit closer to what than we were. Now, in the assignment, you said that there's probably a miss.
It asks you to show the last 3 bus routes driven by a driver.
Right.
But the only actual date involved is the date a route is assigned. So you didn't really have it.
You'd have to do some really complicated joins, I think.
As far as I can tell, there wasn't any dates in the database about when a route was driven.
Well, there should be in the bus driver assignment or the bus schedule assignment. It also has the driver, right?
But it doesn't have this driver drove this route on this date, drove it on that date, drove it on that.
Should have, I think. Let me look at the Metro.
Maybe I'm just looking at the wrong tables.
Yeah, well, as I said, one of the problems with these tables is that you guys didn't make them, so knowing what's in them is a. Let's look at bus schedule assignment. I just need the table columns, actually. So there's an assignment key, there's a shift key, and there's the employee key.
Yeah.
So the shift is a time.
Well, go take a look at that. Shift key, what
So the shifts are, I think by times I may have just meant what shifts.
The question is, use the cross-apply operator to return the last 3 routes driven by each driver.
Right, and there's a route key and there's a driver key.
But yeah, but if you look at the routes, there's no, the only date I could find was the date it was assigned.
Right, which is all that I think you would need, right?
Okay. So that's not when they were driven, though. That was when the route was assigned to the driver.
I'm assuming that the assignment is the driving.
Oh, okay. Well, this, on November 1st, he was assigned to this route, which he drove for 6 months.
Oh, I'm thinking of this as the daily, what they drove each day.
Okay.
So it's a semantics thing.
Okay. So if that's the date we're talking about.
Yeah, this is the date I meant.
That's what I.
Yeah, I think you can do it all with this table. Right.
Uh,
And I'm assuming these are the dates that they were the actual driving happened.
yeah,
The name
schedule
is probably unfortunate because it suggests what you're saying, that it was just assigned on that date.
Very good. I've got one.
Okay. Give it a shot. The last one I may treat as like extra credit. You're frozen?
I think it just, I didn't do anything for a while, so it just kind of, my mask was.
How do you go about figuring out what was incorrect in the previous assignment?
Did I tell you? So you had the test trace?
Yeah.
I could look at it for one thing, but I think with yours, it was just that there was no relation between the subquery and the app. Usually when you do an in, you search for the same value that's in the outer query. I'll look. And it's always possible in this Reddit. So I don't need looking at it. Well, delete doesn't necessarily. Now, I don't necessarily want to.
Oh, there it goes.
Yeah.
Okay. So, is getting that, so
So I
open
think,
up.
yeah, sometimes I have that, so now I can say, okay, we can go. So you cast it as what? Is it, if you cast it as an X, it's an integer division which has, run cast it as a decimal. Yeah, you give it like 10 common two. So it's number one.
So this was
Yeah, so it's like
So I know better, but not. So,
let's see.
Your numbers would be different.
Yeah. So.
I'm asking my wife about cross
You know
applies.
what?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, you have-
I don't know where they would show up. I couldn't find it.
You know what? I did that with the time. I would have commented if I was thinking, I would have said it.
Oh, okay.
I just.
Oh, okay. That's good for me.
Yeah, it happens, when I'm doing the thing, so I go through the rubric and if it's good, so I wouldn't remove any points on purpose without comment.
Very good. I kind of thought that would be the case, but I.
Yeah,
but
I
I looked
wouldn't
everywhere I
just
could
take,
look,
I
and
wouldn't write good and then take 2 points off, but that's just.
My wife, who does poster SQL, says that the poster SQL equivalent to cross apply is interjoin lateral. She's going to attempt to explain it to me.
Is that, that's in post? correct?
Postfix.
You'll come explain it to the rest of us. once
I
you're
hope so.
clear,
If I can
you
understand it, I will come explain it to
So I need
everybody
to
else.
post this and then I will. And I need to kill the video. So it doesn't surprise me that Postgres has a related function. Postgres is a pretty good relational database. It's free.
Cool.
I doubt MySQL has it, just because I can't imagine why they would need it for what they do generally. All right, so let me do, what am I doing? I'm going out of here so that I can stop